Okay, let's unpack this. Sometimes, to really get a handle on a figure everyone knows, or maybe a big political sheet, you kind of need a different angle. It's often those perspectives from maybe outside the usual bubble, that fresh take, that gives you the most, well, surprising insights.
Exactly, those nuggets of knowledge you weren't expecting.
Welcome to another deep dive. And today, that's exactly what we're doing. We are diving into a text that gives us a very specific viewpoint. Excerpts from the book From Mar-a-Lago to Mars by Nick Adams. And this deep dive is really tailored for you, our listener. We're going to explore the key ideas, the stories, the analysis, all pulled directly from the pages of this particular book.
Right. And Nick Adams, the author, he comes at this from a really distinct background. He came over from Australia, and he talks about having this deep, lifelong admiration for the United States. He calls it the land where dreams come true. It really draws a stark contrast with Australia. He actually says, America at her worst is far better than any other country at its best.
Wow, that's a strong statement.
It is. And he points to one specific thing as pivotal, reading The Art of the Deal. He got it for his 13th birthday in 1998, which is interesting because the book came out way back in 1987, during the Reagan years.
So he's reading it much later, but it hits him hard.
Huge impact, yeah. He says it really shaped his view of President Trump and cemented his own dream of becoming an American. And that early inspiration, well, it apparently propelled him. By 2015, he was already a recognized speaker and author in conservative circles here in the U.S.
And his view of Trump seems really tied into that whole journey, doesn't it? Like Trump is somehow uniquely American.
Absolutely. He puts it very directly. A man like President Trump could truly only be produced in a country like the United States. That's his perspective.
Okay. So our mission today, using just these excerpts from Adam's book, what are we trying to unpack here?
Well, our goal is to really lay out the author's specific take on Donald Trump's political path, how Adams sees his rise, his impact, the specific moments he highlights, and importantly, what he envisions for the future under Trump's leadership. Based purely on what's in this text, we're going to pull out the key points, the specific dates he mentions, events, the main ideas from different chapters, and definitely those direct quotes, just presenting the author's view as he wrote it.
Got it. So what are the main themes we'll be hitting today? Based on the source material, what ground does Adams cover?
Okay, so according to the text, we'll kick things off with the author's own foundation, that really strong admiration for America and how the art of the deal influenced him early on. Then we'll follow Trump's political journey through Adams's eyes, from being an outsider to that candidacy speech in June 2015, which Adams sees as prophetic.
Right, and we'll definitely need to get into the 2016 win. Adams calls it the dawn of a new era, right? And that includes Chapter 3, Tweet-Seeking Missile, talking about how Trump used Twitter as, what does he call it, statecraft.
Yeah, exactly, statecraft. And we'll touch on some personal interactions Adams describes, like that moment on March 3, 2017, when Trump tweeted about his book. Huge moment for him, apparently. And also a meeting at Mar-a-Lago on February 9, 2023, where Adams says he gave some strategic advice.
Interesting. And what about Trump's effect on the Republican Party in dealing with opposition?
The text covers that, too. Adams discusses Trump's criticism of weak Republicans, touches on January 6 from his perspective, and the move to platforms like Truth Social and then X, which happened in late 2022. He also connects Trump to figures like Barry Goldwater, the idea of fighting harder when, as Adams puts it, the country's existence is on the line.
Okay. And then there's Chapter 7, The Road to Renewed Greatness, leading up to 2024.
Right. That section details the lead-up, with anecdotes from early 2023, like that phone call Trump made to him on January 9, 2023, while Adams was literally checking in for a flight in Sydney. Classic Trump story, according to the author. And we'll spend a good bit of time on Chapter 8, Donald Trump, A Revolution in Language and Communication. Adams really argues Trump fundamentally changed how politicians talk, contrasting his directness with what Adams sees as political speak, euphemisms.
Gotcha. And Chapter 9 is called The Rogan Republicans. Trade, crime, and inflation wakes a sleeping beast. What's the focus there?
Well, despite the title mentioning Rogan, the actual content we have from that chapter zeroes in heavily on trade policy. Adams gives his analysis of tariffs, historical context going back to Trump's quotes from 1987, the McKinley era in the 1890s, and he links what he sees as problems under the Biden-Harris administration back to a desire for Trump's return.
Then there's Chapter 11, The Greatest Mugshot of All Time. That sounds like a key one.
It definitely is, in Adams' telling. We'll explore his take on the August 24, 2023 mugshot, why he sees it as a turning point, how he frames it against the backdrop of political charges and the fight over censorship. Which then leads into Chapter 16, Trump and Free Speech, my mission to make Trumpism permanent, and his whole 1A warriors concept.
And Adams places Trump in history, too. Tradition versus future.
Both, yeah. Chapter 12, Trump, a man of tradition, connects him to Goldwater McKinley, discusses his stance against what Adams terms divisive identity politics, and highlights that Mount Rushmore speech from July 4, 2020. But then, Chapter 13, Trump, a man of the future, paints him as forward-looking, talking about innovation, the Space Force, AI, space exploration.
And he introduces this idea of Generation T.
Right, in Chapter 14, that's the young people who came of age under Trump and what Adams sees as their potential. And then Chapter 15 circles back to McKinley, positioning Trump as his successor, especially looking towards a second term, focusing on things like tariffs and the gold standard.
Seems like he also analyzes the opposition quite a bit.
He does. Chapter 17, From TDS to DT, yes, tackles what he calls Trump derangement syndrome, arguing it was manufactured and ultimately failed. He even references a KGB defector named Yuri Bezmenov and his ideas from 1984. And Chapter 18, Trump's effect on the left, argues Democrats alienated their base and that more naturalized citizens are now voting Republican, in his view.
Okay, nearly there. What about the 2024 election itself in the book?
Chapter 19, Maggio meets MAHA, presents the 2024 election as another revolution. This is where Adams makes the claim about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. joining forces with Trump in the summer of 2024. He also talks about a focus on health and the MAGA movement. And then the final chapters we have excerpts from 20 and 21 election night and President Trump's first letter to the future, cover the 2024 victory as Adams portrays it, and lay out his predictions for Trump's second term, even describing scenes from January to March 2025.
Wow, okay. That's a lot to cover. It's definitely a comprehensive look through one very specific lens. So here's a question for you, the listener, to maybe keep in the back of your mind as we go through all this. Given Nick Adams' journey, his perspective from outside then inside the U.S. system, and his statement, direct from the book, that literally anything can happen when President Trump is in charge, what does this deep dive into his view of Trump's impact and future suggest about the forces shaping American politics and culture right now?
That's a great framing question. Let's start at the beginning then, with Adams' foundation. That admiration for America and the impact of the art of the deal.
Right. Where did this deep admiration come from?
Well, based on the text, it seems deeply ingrained from his youth. He talks about America as this land of opportunity, a place where hard work actually translates into achieving your destiny. He says it's the land where dreams come true, where people think big, and where a man's destiny is in his own hands, so long as he is willing to work for it. Coming from outside, he apparently saw something special here.
And he really contrasts it strongly with other places, like his home country.
He does. That quote again. America at her worst is far better than any other country at its best. It's a powerful claim, reflecting a really potent vision he holds. And he pinpoints the moment that vision crystallized.
The art of the deal. You mentioned his 13th birthday in 1998. It's interesting he highlights that specific moment years after the book's 1987 release.
It seems it was a truly formative experience for him. He describes reading it not just as learning about Trump, but as understanding a certain kind of American ambition and success that Trump embodied for him. It fueled his own desire to become American. And he directly links Trump to the country itself, saying, a man like President Trump could truly only be produced in a country like the United States. He sees Trump as almost an inevitable product of American culture.
So this book, read back in '98, plus that core belief in American exceptionalism, really set his path. By 2015, he'd made it, right? Speaking, writing, involved in the conservative movement here.
Exactly. Which put him in a position to observe and then participate in the political scene he'd admired from afar. And that brings us to Trump actually entering the political arena. Adams notes he wasn't just a casual bystander. He'd apparently been watching Trump closely for nearly 2 decades before that 2015 announcement. He even mentions speculation going back to the turn of the 21st century about Trump possibly making a run, being the biggest political outsider of all time.
And he frames it alongside other outsiders, like Schwarzenegger winning in California back in November 2003.
Right. He sees it as part of a trend, maybe, but Trump was still unique in his view. And Adams says as the months and years rolled on before 2015, Trump's tweets became more and more political, very critical of the Obama administration. He saw those as signals, hints of a permanent shift.
Until the big moment. The official announcement speech on June 16, 2015. Adams treats this as a really pivotal event.
Hugely significant, yeah. He pulls out specific lines from that speech, viewing them through the lens of someone who felt millions were just waiting to hear those exact words. He quotes Trump saying, "Our country needs and deserves a comeback, but we are not going to get that comeback with politicians." And then, politicians are not the solution to our problems, they are the problem. For Adams, that really captured Trump's anti-establishment appeal.
And the promise itself. It is time for government to be run efficiently and effectively. This is our time to once again make our government a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That is why today I am declaring my candidacy for president. I will make America great again.
Adams looks back at that speech and calls it stunning in hindsight how prophetic it was. He argues it perfectly articulated what millions of Americans had wanted to hear for years. It wasn't just politics for him, it was a deep resonance. And Adams says his own reaction was instant. He threw my weight behind President Trump on that very day, stayed with him, even when others apparently advised him to back candidates he knew personally.
Why so immediate? Why that conviction?
He says it boiled down to principles and just this gut feeling, this absolute certainty that Trump would win. He believed Trump had the right message and, crucially, the unique appeal to pull it off. He mentions predicting early on Lou Dobbs's show that Trump would pulverize Hillary Clinton. His reasoning, as laid out in the book, Trump's appeal was broad and deep, broad in its base and deep in its scope. Adams argued Americans didn't want placating. They wanted, in his words, a butt kicker, not a butt kisser in chief. He saw Trump's raw authenticity and willingness to challenge everything as a major threat to the system he felt was failing the American dream.
And that conviction paid off in 2016. Adams calls it a momentous year where Trump proved again anything he is told he cannot do, he is capable of doing.
And 2016 was big for Adams personally, too. He became a full-time U.S. resident in July that year. That meant he could ramp up his own political activity, campaigning for Trump, getting what he calls that front row seat.
So after the election, after that 2016 victory, how does Adams describe the mood? What was the feeling on the ground, according to him?
He paints this picture of real, tangible optimism. He says politics suddenly felt important again for a lot of people, not just something you suffered through. It felt like it could actually unleash creative potential and usher in a new age. He contrasts that sharply with the mood inside Washington.
And he points to the inauguration speech, January 20th, 2017, as capturing that feeling. What parts of that speech does he highlight?
He focuses on the core message of power returning to the people. He quotes Trump, "Washington flourished, but the people did not share in its wealth." Setting up that contrast, then the promise. That all changes, starting right here and right now, because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you. And that powerful line, January 20th, 2017, will be remembered as the day the people became the rulers of this nation again. The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer.
And, of course, the line that defined the administration's approach. From this day forward, a new vision will govern our land. From this moment on, it's going to be America first.
Right. Adams sees this as Trump explicitly taking the side of the American middle class, which Adams views as the bedrock of the country's strength. He argues Trump's opponents wanted to weaken the middle class to weaken America, and Trump signaled they now had a powerful ally in the White House. Adams believes Trump really understood the disconnect between the people and the elites.
And a huge part of how Trump operated in this new era was his use of Twitter. That's chapter 3, right? Tweet-seeking missile.
Yeah, and Adams describes Trump's Twitter use as basically a form of statecraft. Not just random thoughts, but a tool for instant policy communication, for resolving disputes quickly, for putting adversaries both here and abroad on notice. It completely bypassed the traditional media filters.
And Adams shares a really vivid personal story about the power of those tweets. It happened March 3rd, 2017.
He does. He was actually on Fox News discussing his book, Green Card Warrior. Riding home in the limo afterwards, his phone just started blowing up. Why? Because President Trump himself had just tweeted an endorsement of his book.
Wow, that must have been something. How did he react?
He says his first thought was this what it felt like after winning on The Apprentice? He instantly grasped the immense reach of the president's platform. The impact, he says, was global and immediate. The entire world now wanted to speak to me. For Adams, it showed Trump was willing to personally extend his hand to help those whose careers he felt were worthy of elevation, people he saw as doing good work.
And it reinforced that feeling he mentions. Literally anything can happen when President Trump is in charge.
Absolutely. It confirmed for Adams that Trump just operated differently, creating these unexpected major ripples. He even shares a detail about his father seeing the tweet's impact and finally grasping the vision Adams had been chasing. Adams also notes this was apparently the, quote, first time a sitting president had ever endorsed a book, end quote. He stayed active, serving as a media surrogate in the 2020 campaign, attending inauguration events back in January 2017, and so on.
Okay, let's shift to how Adams sees Trump's influence within the Republican Party and how he dealt with opposition. Adams mentions Trump's criticism of weak Republicans.
Yes, he quotes Trump directly on that.
Yeah.
Trump said, you've got a lot of them, and you got a lot of great ones, but you got a lot of weak ones. Republicans are constantly fighting like a boxer with his hands tied behind his back. And the quote ends with Trump saying, we're going to have to fight much harder. It's a clear call for more aggressive tactics from the party.
And Adams argues Republicans didn't really heed that call effectively, especially regarding January 6th.
That's his view. He thinks it was a major fumble. He says Republicans did very little to push back against what he terms the bogus narrative around January 6th. He brings up this principle he holds dear. He who defines the terms of the debate controls the outcome of the debate. By letting Democrats frame January 6th, he argues, Republicans lost control of the story.
So, in Adams' telling, Trump wasn't just leading the party, he was fundamentally reshaping it.
That's his core argument. He believes Trump, coming in, was saving republicanism from itself. He ticks off the changes. From Wall Street's party to Main Street's party, from managing decline to aiming for renaissance, from cultural degradation to defending Americanism, not globalism, from following Democrats into wars to pursuing peace through strength.
Adams also mentions some later interactions with Trump after the presidency in late 2021.
Yeah, just brief mentions. He says he received autographed printouts of my social media posts from Trump then. And at a December event that year, he recounts Trump running into him and saying, it was good to see me. Adams apparently took this as a positive sign that everything would be all right and the focus would shift towards a comeback.
This period also saw big changes in the social media world, which was crucial for Trump's style.
Definitely. Adams points to Trump launching Truth Social and then Elon Musk buying Twitter in late 2022 and rebranding it as X. Adams views X as becoming a new free speech platform whose ethos owes much to President Trump's pioneering creation of Truth Social. So the platforms were shifting, but the need for direct communication remained key.
And even before Trump officially announced for 2024, Adams notes his activity in 2022.
Right, those midterm rallies in 2022. Adams describes them almost like festivals, one part rock concert and one part Super Bowl. He says even though Trump waited until after the midterms to declare, those rallies made it crystal clear to him, and presumably to the base, that Trump was the candidate they wanted.
Adams also links Trump's approach to a historical Republican figure.
Yeah, Barry Goldwater. He argues Trump really embodies Goldwater's spirit. He brings back that famous quote from the 1964 Republican National Convention. Extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. Moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue. Adams sees Trump as living that out and says he personally applies those words when he feels the very existence of the United States is on the line.
That sense of high stakes leads us towards the 2024 cycle, which Adams covers in Chapter 7, The Road to Renewed Greatness. He mentions spending Thanksgiving 2022 with Trump and how after the 2024 declaration, it was suddenly all hands on deck.
Right. And he shares these great personal stories from early 2023 that really showed Trump's direct, maybe unconventional style. Adams was visiting Sydney, Australia, missed some calls from Palm Beach. Then January 7, 2023, he gets a voicemail. It's Trump himself, congratulating him on a C-SPAN speech.
And then the story gets even better a couple of days later.
It does. It's January 9, 2023. Adams is literally at the check-in counter at Sydney Airport. The Qantas agent, Avalon, is helping him. His phone rings, Palm Beach number again. He answers, despite the agent maybe being a bit impatient, tells her who it is, and then he puts Trump on speaker for just like 3 seconds to say hi to Avalon.
No way. What did she do?
He says she just about fainted, then starts telling all her colleagues, saying, this is the wildest thing that has ever happened to me on the job here. Adams even throws in a joke in the book about Trump being good for the career but love life too, after he apparently asked for her number. It's just another example for Adams of the unexpected happening around Trump.
So after these calls, there was a more formal meeting at Mar-a-Lago, February 9, 2023. Adams calls it deeply important. What was the focus?
According to Adams, the meeting was about the game plan for 2024, aiming for a victory that was, in his words, too big to rig. And during that meeting, Adams says he offered his core strategic advice. He told Trump, Mr. President, it's all about the men. Young men in particular. You've got to drive them out in record numbers. He describes Trump looking a bit puzzled initially, so Adams explained why he saw young men as this vital, maybe underappreciated base figure, valuing self-reliance, success, authenticity.
And then something else happened right after that discussion in the same meeting.
Yeah, another one of those moments Adams highlights. Trump apparently picks up his desk phone right then and there, gets Sylvester Stallone on the line, and suddenly Adams is in a three-way conversation with them. He describes Trump and Stallone as two of the most stubbornly successful men of our age.
What did Adams take away from that call?
He reflects that the common thread between Trump and Stallone, despite different fields, was a unique confidence that was backed up by excellence. He links this back to a lesson from his father about confidence needing competence. He then contrasts this imagined energy with sleepy Joe Biden, implying a lack of similar dynamism. And he ends the account of that meeting with a very determined game on.
Okay, that's a perfect lead-in to Chapter 8, which Adams titles Donald Trump, A Revolution in Language and Communication. He claims Trump changed the very way politics is conducted at the level of rhetoric. Big claim.
It is. And he uses a George Carlin quote to frame it. Carlin said, "I don't like words that hide the truth. Americans have trouble facing the truth, so they invent a kind of a soft language to protect themselves from it." Adams argues Trump just bulldozed through that soft language.
So Trump chose straightforward truth over what Adams calls lies and obfuscation. Can you give some of those examples from the book where Adams contrasts the old way of speaking with Trump's style?
Sure. He gives quite a few. Like, instead of calling an incompetent liberal governor someone you need to explore the possibilities of compromise with, Trump would just say stone cold incompetent.
Very different tone. What about NATO allies?
The old way, according to Adams, was to value them as equal members of a vital group fighting for democracy. Trump's way, when allies weren't paying their share, was, we have many NATO members that aren't paying their bills. If you don't pay your bills, you get no protection. It's very simple, blunt.
Any others that stand out?
Yeah, he lists several quick ones. Uniquely bespoke appearance becomes ugly. Highly active nutritional intake becomes fat. What he terms pugnacious defenders of radical feminism get called degenerate and slob. Even congressional friends who have a different understanding of political realities just become liars in Trump's language, according to Adams.
He mentions Trump's language about other countries, too.
Right. He highlights Trump saying China beat the U.S. because our side was stupid. And includes that quote where Trump apparently told OPEC, "You're not going to raise that fucking price, you understand me?" Adams presents these not just as insults, but it's a deliberate tactic to cut through the usual political fluff.
Adams also talks about Trump's quickness, his ability to think on your feet.
He does. And he uses that exchange with ABC News reporter Cecilia Vega at a press conference. Trump joked, "She's shocked that I picked her. She's in a state of shock." Vega replied, "I'm not thinking, Mr. President." And Trump shot back instantly, "I know you're not thinking. You never do."
Definitely quick. Adams even references Joe Rogan on this.
Yeah, he brings up Rogan, observing previously that Trump has better rhetorical and intellectual timing than most of the best stand-up comedians. Adams uses this to underline just how effective and engaging he finds Trump's communication style, connecting with people in a way standard politicians don't.
And Adams believes this style is key to Trump's appeal with certain groups.
Absolutely. He links that authenticity, that willingness to tell it like it is, directly to why young men, and even some former Bernie Sanders supporters, gravitated towards him. He says, President Trump isn't afraid to tell it like it is. He doesn't shy away from telling a loser that he is a loser. Adams argues Trump can be dignified and gallant, but also conversational, realistic, and pragmatic. It's this mix, but always grounded in perceived honesty, that Adams believes convinced millions he was genuinely fighting for them in his first term.
Okay, let's shift to Chapter 9, The Rogan Republicans. Trade, crime, and inflation wakes a sleeping beast. You mentioned that despite the title, the focus in the excerpts we have is really on trade.
That's right. Adams uses this section to dig into what he sees as major problems with U.S. trade policy over the years. He starts by referencing Reagan and the Reagan Democrats, those working-class voters, especially in states like Michigan, who shifted Republican. He sees a parallel with Trump's ability to attract similar voters.
Then he tackles the idea of free trade, basically arguing the U.S. doesn't really have it.
Yeah, his argument is the system isn't truly free or fair for America. He actually goes way back, quoting Trump from Larry King Live on September 2, 1987. Even back then, Trump was saying, "I believe it's very important that you have free trade, but We don't have free trade right now. He used Japan as the example, saying it was virtually impossible for an American to do business there while they were buying up U.S. assets.
Right, the Manhattan real estate example from '87.
Exactly. And even then, Trump argued countries benefiting from U.S. defense should make a contribution. Adams quotes him questioning if America should keep defending countries like Japan for free or risk going totally bust. It shows, for Adams, a consistency in Trump's thinking on trade and fair burden sharing stretching back decades.
And Adams builds on this, arguing the current system means the U.S. is effectively subsidizing these other countries.
That's his point. He says Americans end up paying twice for the same goods, once for the item itself, and again through taxes that fund the defense and support systems benefiting those trading partners.
He also brings in history, arguing America's past strength was built differently.
He does. He makes a case for tariffs, stating flatly, our great industry was built on tariffs. He points to the 19th century industrial boom and specifically the McKinley presidency in the 1890s as a sustained golden age of American greatness. He describes that era as having high tariffs. It was a time of zero income tax, low regulation, no Federal Reserve, and the classical gold standard. He presents this almost as a golden formula that was lost.
So Trump's focus on tariffs, in Adams' view, is a return to that successful past.
Precisely. Adams explains Trump sees a dual utility in tariffs. They protect American industries and serve as a powerful diplomatic tool for negotiation. He also mentions Trump's criticism of other countries manipulating their currency, which he argues hurts American consumers and businesses.
Adams even links this back to Trump's earlier flirtations with politics.
Right. He mentions Trump considering a run in 1999 with the Reform Party, drawing parallels to Ross Perot. He reminds us of Perot's opposition to NAFTA back in 1992, and that famous giant sucking sound, warning about jobs leaving. Adams contrasts the bipartisan support for NAFTA then with Trump, who actually brought it to an end in his first term, replacing it with the USMCA.
And he quotes Trump from 1999 again, talking to Larry King.
Yeah, showing that consistency. Trump told King, what you can do is you can negotiate fair trade agreements. We've been ripped off as a country by virtually every country we do business with. He reiterated his opposition to NAFTA then, predicting it would be a disaster if the economy weakened. His core principle was fairness. If other countries are not going to treat you fairly, Larry, I think that those countries should suffer the consequences.
Adams then connects these long-held views to more recent events, like the 2020 pandemic shutdowns.
Right. He argues those shutdowns expose the dangers of relying on fragile global supply chains, something Trump had been warning about.
And he specifically calls out China joining the World Trade Organization, the WTO.
Yes, he flags December 11th, 2001, just 2 months after 9/11 as the date China joined. He presents this as a huge bipartisan blunder, one Trump opposed at the time. Adams argues the following 15 years completely vindicated Trump's position. He even quotes Trump from 2020 asking, regarding China using the WTO to its advantage, how stupid were the people that stood here and allowed it to happen?
And to wrap up this chapter, Adams connects these economic arguments to contemporary issues under the Biden-Harris administration.
He does. He draws parallels to the Carter years' inflation energy crisis and links them to what he describes as current problems under Biden-Harris. Inflation again, crime, the border situation, cuts to services. His conclusion, as presented in the book, is that this created widespread buyer's remorse and a strong feeling that America wanted President Trump back. He contrasts this feeling among ordinary people with what he portrays as comedians and media outlets ignoring the real pain people were feeling.
That sense of dissatisfaction leads us to what Adams calls a truly pivotal moment in Chapter 11, the greatest mugshot of all time.
Right. He sets the stage by comparing political arrests in the U.S. to what he suggests is more common in his term, third world countries. He lists examples like Pakistan's Imran Khan in 2023, Burma, the Philippines' Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo in 2011, Brazil, Peru, Ecuador.
His point being that this kind of thing is very rare in the U.S.
Exactly. He argues it's highly unusual here because of America's history of, well, civility and, crucially, the First Amendment.
And he really emphasizes the First Amendment's role here.
He does. He stresses that it's not the government granting a right, but a restriction on government, protecting rights he believes are pre-existing, derived from God-given natural law. He calls it unique globally, a dam against government intrusion, especially on speech.
And against that backdrop, he claims Trump has faced unprecedented attacks.
Unprecedented is the word he uses. He says Trump has been attacked more viciously and barbarously by his opponents than any other president. He points to the hitherto unthinkable mass censorship of a sitting president at the end of Trump's first term as a clear sign, a harbinger, he calls it, of a conspiracy to prevent his return.
And he sees the criminal charges brought against Trump as part of that effort.
Directly. He argues Democrats filed multiple bogus criminal charges because they knew Trump was almost certain to run for president in 2024. The goal, in Adams' view, wasn't justice, but simply to keep Trump off of the campaign trail and in the courtroom. He sees it as a reaction to Trump's continued popularity after what Adams refers to as the hanky-panky that occurred during the 2020 vote.
Which all led to the Fulton County, Georgia indictment and the decision to actually take a mugshot. Adams describes the day, August 24, 2023.
He talks about the intense anticipation, everyone watching the helicopter footage of Trump's movements, wondering, as Adams puts it, was it really going to happen? Could the Democrats and their allies be that stupid?
And they did it. The mugshot.
And Adams's reaction in the book is immediate and strong. The greatest mugshot of all time. He talks about its instant massive impact becoming the most viral image of all time up to that point, plastered on merchandise everywhere, the photograph that made the world stand still.
How does Adams interpret the meaning of that single picture?
He argues it marked a key turning point in the election. He claims it shifted the feeling on the ground, made it palpable, and put Trump back at the front and center not only of politics but of the culture. What was meant to shame, Adams argues, became a powerful symbol of defiance for supporters.
So he thinks the Democrats completely misread how it would play out.
Totally miscalculated in his view. He analyzes what he thinks their strategy was. Make Trump unelectable, bog him down in courtrooms, maybe even jail him to create a legal minefield. Adams dismisses all that as hogwash. He says it ignored the real public mood he saw while registering voters and campaigning on the ground.
And this moment also affected Trump's relationship with social media platforms.
Adams notes it led to a thaw between Trump and X, formerly Twitter, under Elon Musk. Trump actually posted the mugshot on X that day, his return to the platform. Adams saw this as the beginning of new great things to come in the following year in terms of online reach.
And the mugshot directly inspired Adams to take action himself.
Yes, he says it was the catalyst for him starting his organization, 1A Warriors. The mission, as he states it, is to preserve and revive our cherished First Amendment and stop Americans facing retribution, political or private sector, for exercising their rights.
This seems to tie into his broader points about Trump's place in American tradition, which he gets into in Chapter 12, Trump, a man of tradition.
Exactly. He argues Trump connects America back to its core traditions.
And he brings up that Barry Goldwater quote again from 1964.
He does. That call to return to proven ways, not because they are old, but because they are true. He positions Goldwater as this key anti-collectivist figure whose movement eventually led to Reagan's success. Adams even notes Reagan's 1980 win and his 1966 California governor win were partly built on campaigning for Goldwater earlier.
But Adams is critical of a later Republican administration, George W. Bush, especially post 9/11.
Very critical. He argues the Bush administration's foreign policy, framed as liberationist ideology, ignored Goldwater's caution that freedom is not the fruit of every soil. He also invokes James Madison's idea that the Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. Adams contends Bush-Cheney strayed from Reaganism with big spending and the Patriot Act's blowtorch approach to constitutional liberty. He even throws in Reagan's 1980 line. In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
He views Obama's election in 2008 as a direct reaction to those Bush years.
He does, a rejection of that direction. But he also faults conservatives at the time for not offering a strong, coherent, future-looking alternative.
And he has a specific take on Obama's hope and change message.
He argues that beneath the surface, Obama's approach defines society mainly through an obsession with racial division, rather than focusing on shared values or achievements. He talks about the invention of a new identity politics under Obama, which he differentiates from the legislative identity politics of the 1960s.
What's the key difference for Adams?
He claims this newer identity politics was not intended to be resolved, it was intended to be endless. He argues it was a strategy borrowed from Europe or the Third World, designed to tell certain groups, the American dream is not for you, but the soft socialist Democrat version of America is for you. Fostering division, not solving it, in his analysis.
He points to a specific incident from the 2008 campaign to illustrate this.
Yeah, that John McCain town hall where a voter called Obama an Arab. Adams critiques McCain's response. Obama's a decent American, saying that was the moment McCain lost.
Right.
Adams suggests McCain should have pivoted to policy differences, promising to bring America back to its days of glory instead of engaging on the racial framing. He also mentions the Tea Party arising as a response to government overreach, arguing they were unfairly smeared as white racists.
For Adams, a key moment where Trump pushed back against these trends was the Mount Rushmore speech.
Absolutely. He sees Trump's July 4, 2020 speech at Mount Rushmore as a critical defense. He quotes Trump directly confronting attacks on American history and symbols. Trump said, "We gather tonight to herald the most important day, July 4th, 1776. All men are created equal."
And Trump addressed the statue controversies head-on.
Yes. Trump stated, "Angry mobs are trying to tear down statues of our founders. This is the very definition of totalitarianism. It has absolutely no place in the United States of America." He then broadened the point. This left-wing cultural revolution is designed to overthrow the American Revolution. And talk about kids being taught in school to hate their own country. The radical view of American history is a web of lies.
Adams interprets that speech as Trump essentially saving the country.
That's how strongly he puts it. He believes Trump saved America from the fate of countries torn apart by sectarian violence, like Yugoslavia in the 90s. He argues Trump exposed the logical conclusion of the identity politics he blames on Obama. Adams contends that under Biden-Harris, this radicalism became normalized, that the violence of 2020 became the executive orders of 2021.
But he also saw pushback developing.
Yes, he argues the authentic American spirit, the spirit of 1776, started rising against what he calls a would-be Bolshevist 1917. He attributes this largely to the ruinous economy and perceived contempt for traditional American values under Biden-Harris. He adds that violent revolutions tend to eat their own, making it hard for Democrats to sustain momentum based purely on what he calls racial and sexual grievance. He mentions his own involvement in rallying young people who are rejecting these perceived Biden-Harris values.
So Adams presents Trump as deeply rooted in tradition, but then Chapter 13 argues he's also a man of the future. How does he square that?
His point is that Trump isn't just about the past. He's constantly pushing forward, refusing to rest on laurels. He actually uses Trump's buildings, specifically Trump Tower, as a metaphor.
Trump Tower. How does that represent the future for Adams?
He talks about its unique architecture, how it still feels brand new decades later. He sees it embodying a spirit of limitless optimism, a visionary statement about New York City itself.
And he brings up Trump's use of technology again.
Definitely. He says Trump's mastery of technology changed political communication strategies forever. He also praises what he calls Trump's turbocharged innovation during the first term, contrasting it favorably with the racial and sexual obsessions he assigns to the Obama era. Under Trump, Adams writes, Americans were unleashed to do what they do best: innovate, invent, and excel.
He specifically mentions the Space Force here.
Yes, he calls the creation of the U.S. Space Force the most significant achievement in the annals of aerospace since the creation of NASA under President Eisenhower. A very concrete example for him of Trump's future focus.
And looking further ahead, Adams makes some pretty bold predictions linking Trump to future tech.
He does. He predicts the age of Trump may well be remembered as the age of consolidated and practical artificial intelligence. He thinks AI will free the creative spirit, and even makes the claim that because of President Trump, the language of AI remains American English. He also sees the Trump era becoming a new golden era in the age of space exploration, reviving the spirit of Apollo and the shuttle, which he argues declined under Bush and Obama before the private sector stepped in.
Adams also reflects on how presidents shape generations.
Yeah, he explores that idea. FDR's New Deal is his prime example of a presidency fundamentally changing the country and a generation's outlook. He contrasts Kennedy and Johnson. Optimism was replaced by cynicism, honesty replaced by subterfuge, lofty words about peace replaced by the grim reality of Vietnam to show how quickly the tone can shift.
And he sees Reagan as having a similar, maybe opposite major impact.
He argues Reagan had the greater generational impact than any leader since FDR, challenging the post-New Deal consensus, restoring the middle class. This paved the way for George H.W. Bush, whom Adams views as a capable custodian for the Reagan generation.
But the Clinton era brought a different kind of generational shift, in Adams' view.
He argues Clinton effectively legalized the sexual revolution, leading to a vastly more cynical generation than Reagan's optimistic one. He believes the foreign policy under George W. Bush and the cynical manipulation of racial and sexual politics under Obama only deepened that cynicism, leaving America wondering if it could ever regain its optimism.
And Trump, for Adams, is the answer to that question.
Yes, he presents Trump as the antidote, a figure whose entire life, words, and deeds exude optimism, offering a sharp break from the cynicism Adams saw dominating before 2016.
Which brings us neatly to chapter 14 and this concept Adams introduces, Generation T.
Right. This is his term for the young people who were coming of age under Trump's presidency.
How does he describe this generation? What are their values, according to Adams?
He sees them as believing anything is possible to invent. They want to be successful, self-made men and women, echoing that entrepreneurial spirit. They're optimistic, he says, but also realistic about the challenges. He writes, they have a fire that tells itself that greatness is possible if you fight like hell. He even calls them strong men made by the hard times created by President Trump's predecessors, implying they were toughened by the Obama and Biden-Harris years.
And he thinks this generation is key to America's future.
Absolutely. He positions Generation T as the ones who will secure a permanently better America. He believes they'll be powered by the hitherto unknown prosperity that President Trump's second term represents, stating that almost as a future fact within the book's narrative.
How does he say Generation T differs from earlier generations he talked about, like the New Deal or Reagan generations?
He says they're unlike the New Deal generation. They don't really expect government handouts in the same way. And unlike Generation Reagan, they're perhaps more skeptical of traditional private sector norms and big institutions.
So who does he compare them to?
He draws parallels to the pioneers of 19th century America and even the founding generation. He sees a similar spirit of having to create everything from scratch, guided by faith in natural law.
And he gives them a specific motto or credo.
Yes, short and direct.
Yeah.
Americanism, not globalism, is our credo, reflecting that focus on national interest over global frameworks.
He also mentions they're financially savvy.
He notes their growing financial literacy and a drive to emulate and internalize Trump's economic insights, learned directly from his words, according to Adams.
And he finishes that chapter with a call to action for them.
Yeah, basically urging less talk, more action. He quotes, "It is time to prognosticate less and to do more. It is time to make America great again." This is President Trump's message, and this is the guiding ethos of Generation T.
Let's look at another historical parallel Adams draws in Chapter 15, President of the World. Here he connects Trump to President William McKinley.
Yes, despite that broad chapter title, the specific content we have focuses heavily on McKinley, who served in the 1890s and died in 1901. Adams argues Trump is McKinley's natural successor, particularly relevant looking towards the 2024 election and a potential second term, as Adams describes it.
McKinley isn't always the first president people think of. Why him?
Adams acknowledges McKinley's legacy is maybe dimmer because he was pre-radio and TV. But he argues McKinley was actually the first truly modern president.
Modern in what way?
He sees McKinley as bridging the post-Civil War era with the 20th century. He highlights the 1896 election, McKinley, co-gold standard, versus William Jennings Bryan, pro-bimetallism, blaming the 1893 recession on gold.
Adams touches on the economics of that debate.
He explains Bryan's position, but then counters it using Gresham's law. Bad money drives out good, essentially siding with the stability of gold. Adams also praises McKinley's accessibility, saying he took questions from the public and the press every day of the week, apart from Sunday, drawing a parallel to Trump's frequent media engagement.
And McKinley's win in 1896 was a significant political shift.
It was. Adams presents it as ushering in the fourth party system, dominated by Republicans. He credits McKinley's policies for the prosperity that followed, legislating the gold standard and, crucially, solving the early 1890s recession by collecting tariffs effectively.
This era also saw America's global power grow significantly.
Right. Adams notes that under McKinley, U.S. GDP overtook the British empires. He credits McKinley with expanding U.S. territory Hawaii, starting the Panama Canal, taking charge of Cuba and the Philippines from Spain, all while the economy boomed and innovation thrived.
He contrasts McKinley's expansion with more recent wars.
He does. He argues McKinley's expansion was successful and beneficial, unlike what he calls the costly while producing no tangible benefits wars under LBJ, Vietnam, Bush, Iraq, and Obama.
And Adams frames both Trump and McKinley as peace presidents, despite maybe some perceptions otherwise.
That's his argument. He believes that while both projected strength, their ultimate aim was peace and stability. He uses Trump's June 30 through 2019 unplanned meeting with Kim Jong-un at the DMZ as a prime example of Trump's peacemaking approach.
How does Adams describe that specific DMZ moment?
He calls it a moment that changed the tide of human history, seeing it as one small step for two men and one giant leap for the peace of mankind. For Adams, it showed Trump's unique ability to connect directly with even the toughest adversaries.
Why does Adams think these tough leaders respected Trump?
He argues they respected Trump's humanity, his authenticity, his directness. He contrasts this with what he portrays as the style of a community organizer or leaders using left-wing DEI rhetoric. Yeah. He claims foreign powers laughed at us under his predecessors, but respected Trump's strength and straightforwardness.
This idea of fighting for principles connects to another major theme. The battle against censorship, detailed in Chapter 16, Trump and Free Speech, my mission to make Trumpism permanent.
Right, this is clearly a core issue for Adams. He starts by mentioning censorship fears abroad, using Australia as an example, before stressing the need to secure Trump's free speech legacy here.
He goes back to the founding era to ground this argument.
He does. He talks about the period after the Revolution, 1776, the Peace Treaty, 1783, the failure of the Articles of Confederation, ratified 1781, leading up to the Constitution, ratified June 1788.
And the addition of the Bill of Rights.
He explains the first 10 amendments were added to calm fears about government overreach. He quotes the First Amendment, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or abridging the freedom of speech, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble." He emphasizes the intent was clear. Government could not infringe on free speech, which he sees as a right under God's natural law.
But Adams argues this principle is under attack today.
Yes, he contends that in the 21st century, officials and bureaucrats resent the First Amendment. And he claims censorious proxies in the private sector have taken it upon themselves to censor and severely punish Americans, sometimes acting on behalf of government, sometimes not.
He has a name for this system.
He calls it the censorship industrial complex. And he finds it alarmingly similar to China's social credit system. He specifically argues that under the Biden administration, the federal government actively worked to actively coerce major corporations into the censorship of citizens.
He gives an example of this alleged coercion.
He points to Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg telling Joe Rogan that Biden officials had screamed and swore at Meta executives to pressure them on content moderation. Adams sees this as proof of government outsourcing censorship.
And he believes this complex involves more than just U.S. entities.
He claims it predates Biden, but was perfected during Biden, and crucially involved foreign interests, foreign money, and even foreign governments, all working to ruin American lives through censorship.
He describes pretty severe consequences for people targeted by this alleged complex.
He talks about debanking, a term he says has entered the lexicon. People getting banned not just from social media, but from banks, PayPal, Venmo, then maybe banned from Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, even food delivery apps.
What's the goal of this, in Adams' view?
To send a message, he says. Sit down, shut up, and do as you were told. He calls it totally un-American, especially since, he argues, the targets often have not committed any crime and frequently include Christian conservatives.
And he keeps coming back to that China comparison.
Explicitly, he compares it to China's system, where the state monitors you and can restrict your life, money, travel, marriage based on disapproval. He warns the essence of the Chinese social credit score is already here in the U.S. through these practices.
He does mention Trump took executive action on this.
Yes, he notes Trump signed an executive order mandating the total cessation of government-directed censorship.
And this whole issue directly led to Adams founding 1A Warriors.
Exactly. He says he started it to secure President Trump's free speech legacy, but to prevent Americans exercising their constitutional rights from facing political or private sector retribution ever again. Yeah. He describes it as focused on straightforward, practical, and generationally secure solutions. And he ties it right back to his beginning, saying he couldn't have done it without the wisdom I learned from The Art of the Deal when I first read it in 1998.
Adams also contrasts how the left and conservatives achieve lasting change.
Right. He argues the left has successfully achieved unshakable permanency for its goals through legislative and institutional capture, getting their priorities embedded in laws and institutions. Conservatives, he thinks, rely too much on elections and too little on institutional and legislative capture.
He sees the Second Amendment movement as a conservative success story in that regard.
Yes, he holds it up as the model. Organized groups successfully expanding rights over time through lobbying, legislation, public outreach, education, media, lawsuits, electioneering, a multi-front effort. He believes this is what's needed to secure free speech and other rights.
And he connects this idea of strategic creativity back to Trump.
He argues that before Trump, creativity in politics was often seen as risky. Trump, he says, threw down the gauntlet for a new way of thinking. He uses the TikTok situation as an example. Instead of just ban or sell, Trump tried to negotiate a different kind of deal.
He sees Trump as a role model in this, a teacher.
Yes, he calls Trump a teacher as much as he is a leader, hoping readers learn these lessons about political strategy. He also frames Trump's expected 2025-2029 term as likely President Trump's grand finale, adding urgency to the need to learn and implement these strategies now.
Okay, let's turn to Chapter 17, From TDS to DT. Yes. Here, Adams analyzes Trump derangement syndrome, or TDS.
Right. He calls TDS this strange financial, sociological, and party political expression. He starts by arguing that before Trump ran for president, he was actually very popular.
How does Adams describe pre-candidate Trump?
He calls him one of the most beloved men in the country, the people's billionaire. He uses that Kipling line, walk with kings nor lose the common touch. Describes him as larger than life, but he has always been someone whose feet are on the ground. Basically, an honest man who respects you unless you give him a very good reason not to do so.
So Adams definitely sees TDS as something artificial, manufactured.
Absolutely. He states it flat out. TDS was not a naturally occurring virus. It was made in the well-funded labs of a legacy media. He claims it was backed by corporate money and funds from sinister NGOs from abroad. He calls it the most costly and wide-reaching propaganda campaign in history, aimed at making people afraid to support Trump, even privately.
He even compares the methods used to communist tactics.
He argues the techniques mimic those of communist regimes, taken from the communist playbook. He brings in Yuri Bezmenov, identifying him as a defector, a high-ranking official in the KGB. He references Bezmenov's 1984 interview with G. Edward Griffin.
What's the key point from Bezmenov that Adams applies to TDS?
According to Adams' account, Bezmenov said the way to destroy a country is through the demoralization of its youth and its young men in particular. Adams quotes Bezmenov saying a demoralized person would not even recognize the truth if it was clearly presented to them.
And Adams connects this idea of demoralization to current social debates.
He does. He argues that ideas he finds contrary to natural law, like men can get pregnant or men in women's sports locker rooms, are part of a calculated plan to make America weak by demoralizing us. He believes this erodes the ability to understand natural law, making people lose our will to be great.
He also uses Bezmenov's term, useful idiots.
Right, describing them as the true believers who buy into the ideology, the ones who drank the communist Kool-Aid, but who Bezmenov predicted would be discarded once their side won power.
Adams then contrasts mainstream polling with what he saw online.
He points out that legacy media polls constantly showed Trump losing or unpopular, while online polls, especially on places like Twitter, always showed huge majorities for President Trump. He claims these online polls were far more accurate predictors of Trump's actual election results.
And he ties this to the online phrase, touch grass.
Yeah, using that modern term for getting back to reality. He says his own experience campaigning from coast to coast, talking to thousands of voters, confirmed the online polls' accuracy over the traditional ones. He saw the support firsthand.
So Adams argues that between 2023 and 2024, the tide turned and TDS started to fade.
That's his contention. He thinks the last remnants of TDS dissolved because the media's lies became so big that a bubble burst. He writes, between the inflation, out-of-control crime, the abolition of our southern border, the destruction of our industries, people knew that the media's tricks to demoralize us could no longer work. Reality became undeniable in his view.
And he identifies a specific moment in June 2024 as the final nail in the coffin for TDS.
Yes, he points to President Trump's debate with Joe Biden in June 2024. He argues Biden's performance was so poor, so incoherent in his telling, that the media couldn't spin it and basically safely retreated up its own ass.
Yeah.
Gave up trying to prop up the narrative, as Adams sees it.
This leads into Chapter 18, where Adams looks at Trump's effect on the left.
Right. He circles back to his argument about the Democratic base.
Remind us of that argument.
He argues that Obama-era Democrats essentially traded their traditional working-class base for a more urban, grievance-focused constituency centered on sexual and racial grievances. He thinks they never expected that old base union members, blue-collar workers, to actually leave and join a new party, especially one led by Trump.
And they underestimated the Republican appeal to those voters.
Exactly. Adams contends Democrats didn't foresee a Republican leader intelligent enough to speak directly to the politically homeless labor union members, blue-collar workers, and young men who felt abandoned by the Democrats' shift.
He also mentions a split among Catholic voters.
He points to a growing divide among Roman Catholics, dating back to the Clinton era's embrace of abortion rights, which he argues alienated a large, traditionally Democratic-leaning group.
And Adams makes a pretty controversial claim about how Democrats are supposedly replacing their base now.
Yes, it's a strong claim. He argues that having alienated their traditional base, Democrats are now trying to import one through illegal immigration. He states this explains what he calls their strange passion for defending convicted murderers and rapists who broke into the country illegally.
But he contrasts this with legal immigrants, arguing they are moving towards Trump and the Republicans.
Yes, that's his view. He argues more naturalized citizens who came to the country legally are voting Republican under Trump. Why? Because Adams claims these citizens who worked hard to become American see Democrats taking their money via punitive taxation, hurting businesses with mind-blowing insane regulation, and letting crime ruin cities. His conclusion: the natural place for anyone with common sense is President Trump's Republican Party.
This analysis sets up his view of the 2024 election in Chapter 19, MAGA meets Mahaha.
Right. He calls 2024 a further political revolution, building on everything he's discussed. He mentions basic meat and potatoes realities like taxes, a GOP strength in his view, and healthcare costs, a Dem strength, as driving voter choices.
And this is where he brings in Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Yes. He describes RFK Jr. as a former Democrat who represents an older, maybe broader Democratic tradition. He contrasts the historical Kennedy family, anti-communist, religious, focused on prosperity, with modern Democrats, as he sees them.
And Adams makes a very specific claim about Kennedy's actions in 2024.
He states quite definitively in the text that by the summer of 2024, Kennedy decided to withdraw from the race to join forces with President Trump. Adams notes Kennedy was already popular with MAGA supporters and became an instant hero, partly because, Adams claims, the movement was increasingly focused on health.
He elaborates on this health focus within Maggio.
He does. He says personal fitness, nutrition, and health became front and center issues, especially for young men. Avoiding processed foods, taking vitamins, hitting the gym. He sees this as part of the Magia ethos.
And what's Adams' final thought or advice regarding the 2024 outcome in this chapter?
He offers that simple advice again. Never bet against President Trump. And he concludes by stating the 2024 results showed Magia was winning in areas never thought possible before, suggesting the movement's reach had significantly expanded.
Which brings us to the finale in the excerpts. Chapters 20 and 21 covering election night and President Trump's first letter to the future.
Right. Adams describes the scene after the results came in, saying the 4-year national nightmare was over. He then quotes from Trump's victory statement delivered to a cheering crowd.
What were the key lines Adams includes from that statement?
According to the book, Trump said, "We overcame obstacles that nobody thought possible, and it's now clear that we've achieved the most incredible political thing. I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president." And the quote continues with a promise. "I will not rest until we have delivered the strong, safe, and prosperous America that our children deserve and that you deserve. This will truly be the golden age of America."
Adams draws a contrast between the reaction to this win and the reaction in 2016.
He does. He argues that unlike 2016, which was immediately met by what he terms a sinister counter-coup involving hoaxes, censorship, lies, impeachments, and lawfare, the opposition's efforts in 2024 had failed. He sees the 2024 win as vindication, proof that all the work, every rally, every podcast, every speech, and every post on Truth Social had paid off.
He also notes a change in support from the business world.
Yes, he points out that some business leaders who were maybe hesitant before came aboard the Trump train this time, specifically naming Bill Ackman, Elon Musk, and David Sachs.
And he highlights Trump's broader demographic appeal in 2024.
He emphasizes Trump's gains among Black, Hispanic, and Asian Americans, alongside his continued strong support from white working and middle-class voters.
Okay, so based on the text, and Adams even references photos included from January to March 2025, what's his vision for this second term? What does he predict?
Adams paints a picture of major resurgence. He predicts hitherto unknowable technological advancements, a big focus on space, with the Space Force and space program creating new frontiers, a booming economy, strong dollar.
What about specific industries or quality of life?
He sees the U.S. becoming the global capital of a new crypto industry, alongside rapid AI development. On quality of life, he predicts suburbs will become safe again, home ownership achievable for young people. Cities will also become safe, revitalized as hubs for business and culture.
And America's place in the world, according to Adams's vision.
He predicts massive global investment flowing into the U.S., but he pairs this with a very strict border policy, shutting it to what he calls hordes of invaders, while welcoming, in his words, dreamers, the doers and the inventors, the best of the best and nothing less. It's a vision prioritizing certain kinds of immigration he sees as beneficial.
Okay. So we've really dug deep into Nick Adams' specific perspective from these excerpts of From Mar-a-Lago to Mars. We've traced his background, the influence of the art of the deal from 1998. We've explored his view on Trump's communication, that direct revolutionary style he describes.
Yeah, and how Adams sees Trump connecting to American tradition figures like Goldwater or McKinley, but also pushing towards the future with tech, space, AI. We covered his concept of Generation T, the significance he places on moments like the August 24, 2023 mugshot, the challenges of censorship, and his own 1A Warriors initiative, which he explicitly ties back to lessons from the art of the deal.
Right. And we looked at his analysis of the 2024 campaign, his claim about RFK Jr. joining Trump in the summer of 2024, his take on TDS, and how he portrays the beginning of that predicted golden age, even citing scenes from early 2025. We've really tried to stick to the specific dates, events, chapter points, and quotes presented by Adams in the source material we have.
Exactly. You've heard how this author, through his unique journey and interpretation, presents President Trump as someone capable of reigniting optimism, challenging systems, and, in his view, ushering in a new era.
So as you, our listener, think about everything we've unpacked today, strictly from Nick Adams' viewpoint in this book, maybe consider this. What does this particular perspective make you think about the role personality plays in politics, about how communication shapes an era, or maybe about that persistent American idea that, for better or worse, anything is possible?
A lot to chew on there.
Definitely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.